Peace and blessings. This is Penelope. I'm reading from the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, A Message of Wisdom and Love, brought into the present time by Claire Hartsong. Chapter 1, A Letter from Anna of Mount Carmel. My dear friend, I bring you greetings of love and peace this day. I am Anna, also known as the mother of Mary and the grandmother of Jesus. The fact that you are reading this letter as an introduction to my story is something of a miracle, for I send this message to you across great spans of time and space, and yet I am here, closer than you might think. I extend to you a personal invitation to come and embark on a journey with me that will follow the hidden initiatory path that my family and I walked 2,000 years ago. Our meeting and travels together will be accomplished through our imagination as you read the pages upon which I reveal myself. The only difference between my path and yours today is that your present daily life is the temple and mystery school, and you are your own master, teacher, and guru. Then when you come together in masterful equality, the power of your individual influence can be amplified through beneficent group intention. I offer you my version of a complex, compelling, and life-transforming story among many that presents Jesus, the human, and Jesus, the Christ. Along the circuitous path that leads us to meet with the Christ face to face, much will be revealed about the ancient Essene initiations that I mastered. These same initiations I facilitated for Mother Mary, Yahshua ben Joseph, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and other adepts who embodied and exemplified the Christ, or the way of the teacher of righteousness, the rightful use of energy. I gave these wisdom and high alchemy teachings, or internal energy practices, to many, and now I pass the secrets of physical and spiritual immortality, resurrection, and other mysteries on to you. This I do because you, my dear friend, have asked for freedom and empowerment. You are well prepared to use these gifts for the benefit of all as we move through a perilous passage during Earth's birth changes. I realize that times of irreversible change, such as you are encountering now in your world, can be harrowing to entrenched beliefs and dogmatic protocol that have previously pointed the way to God and how to relate to Him. I'm going to read that again. I realize that times of irreversible change, such as you are encountering now in your world, can be harrowing to entrenched beliefs and dogmatic protocol that have previously pointed the way to God and how to relate to Him, in quotes. I am available to meet you wherever you are. Then, together we will travel to a meeting place where the known and unknown court one another and begin to merge. This mystical courtship of consciousness is a mysterious walk between the worlds. It is the rendezvous point where the intuitive, unconditionally loving divine feminine is found. In her embrace, all polarities are meet. In her embrace, all polarities meet, heal into wholeness, and become empowered, balanced, and harmonious expressions of love. You may find that traveling with me involves becoming something of a metaphysical sleuth, digging, probing, exposing, examining, and offering up the old cosmological creator creation and savior victim tyrant paradigms to a clearer light. Understand, my friend, my purpose in bringing greater clarity to the path that the Christ initiate takes is not to contend or to prove that I know the truth about what really happened 2,000 years ago, nor is it my intention to make another's viewpoint wrong. With much soul searching, I look out upon the great vistas of Earth's historical landscape. I see a wilderness wildered with endless rounds of suffering and littered with tattered dramatic scripts. As I feel humanity's heartache, I ask these poignant questions. Are we finished with our gathering of wisdom through duality? Have we had enough repetitions of our favorite melodramatic roles? Can we embrace both polarities as equally divine and know that God, Goddess, expresses in all forms? Can we be content to simply rest in love, having known love's opposite? I give you my experiences in the context of the old esoterical or hidden paradigm of 2,000 years ago. As we proceed together, I invite you to examine, question, and restructure all that I share with you in such a way that you feel acknowledged, empowered, and supported as you pass through the sometimes arduous Christ initiations that are occurring in your life even as we speak. How do we go about restructuring paradigms that no longer serve us? First of all, an understanding of old belief structures, such as the one I present in my story, is required. Next, the vision of a new harmonious form of true individual and global empowerment is called forth and allowed to manifest. As these old and new paradigm lenses merge, important questions arise. What eternal principles empower life's greatest potential and provide a sense of continuity and stability during a time of great transition and change? Are there perspectives within the old way of relating to Creator and creation that enhance our collectivity chosen vision, or our collectively chosen vision? And what tenets of the past do not work and must be discarded? Allowing these questions to be our signposts, I invite us to have the courage to be simple, open-minded, optimistic, appreciative, and childlike adventurers. As we visit a broad spectrum of ventures, topics, and perspectives, I would rather that we keep questioning as we go along, instead of taking positions that defend answers. Have we not had enough holy wars fought over right answers? I invite you to join me in a most timely exploration of these pivotal questions, trusting that the answers are already present, simply awaiting unveiling. I offer my story as a threshing board for winnowing the wheat of eternal wisdom and releasing useless, encumbering chaff. I hold up a mirror to you so that you may behold yourself in greater clarity, knowing that you are the answer to your mind's most perplexing questions and the fulfillment of your heart's deepest longings. Please note that I address you as my friend instead of my child, because now is a time of empowerment in which you and the planet are passing through a rite of passage and are coming of age. While I have played a maternal role for eons in the affairs of humanity, I desire that we meet this day as peers and friends. You have matured sufficiently so that childish temper tantrums and adolescent power games no longer hold your interest. While I gladly offer you my unconditional maternal love, comfort, and example, it is time to be your own Messiah. We have heard each other's request to meet, and so it is that I will come to your abode where we will embark on our journey without distance. Its location does not matter, whether it is in a secluded mountain hermitage, austere desert cave, monastery, sophisticated urban apartment, city ghetto, prison, or sprawling suburban estate. As long as you meet me in your feelings of the present moment. Likewise, my appearance is of little importance. Any caring, strengthening image you may have of me can serve as a sense of initial connection. I assure you, you will recognize me when you see me across the threshold of your open door. My preference is that you might eventually come to know me as I am, beyond all images that would distance me from you in a hierarchical manner, or that might perpetuate our old dysfunctional relationships. Remember this, my friend. It is not my story's cast of characters that is important. It matters little that you know who I have been, even though I have served as an emissary of the celestial realms involved in the original creation of this planet. My incarnations, representing the Divine Mother, have been numerous. I would have you to know that my journey with you and this beloved jewel of the heavens, Earth, has bequeathed me with great treasures of compassion and wisdom. Neither is my version of the Christ story important, nor is any contending to prove it right or wrong. What is infinitely more important is the life-transforming and enhancing energy of love that is carried within beyond my words. Although I have made my ascension, I have freely chosen to return into the earth plane from time to time so that I can continue to participate in Earth's evolution. My profound love for every particle and expression of life moves me to remain close. I have returned at this time so that I might take this long-awaited and most extraordinary journey with you. This I do not as a sacrifice, but because I deeply know that my complete union in God is inseparable from yours and that of Mother Earth. It is reward enough to know that my words have catalyzed your memory of us walking this way before, dreaming our vision of a new earth, and that our love has brought us together again. We can be comforted in knowing that all our adventures, both past and present, have prepared us for this consummating finale we promised to celebrate. I gladly serve you as a paradigm shifter, life coach, midwife, and as a very accessible friend. I accompany you side by side on the path that leads to the knowing that you are the beloved Christ you seek. I offer you my hand in full fellowship so that we can remember the enduring thread of light. That is the path that weaves all life together into a seamless, ever-changing, impeccable tapestry that reveals Father God's infinite love and grace. Regardless of its name, that eternal light reveals your destination to be closer than any limiting thought you may think. You, my eternal friend, are the path, the light, and the way. Let the door to your Christ heart be open. Enter in and know thyself. Enjoy your homecoming journey of remembrance. Anna. End of chapter 1. Anna, the grandmother of Jesus. Chapter 1, A Letter from Carmel. This is Penelope Jordan-Giles. Peace and blessings. This is Penelope. I'm reading from the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, A Message of Wisdom and Love, brought into the present time by Claire Hartsong. Chapter 2. Anna comes forth near Bethlehem. Ah, my beloved friend, we are together at last, just as I promised, before you took this incarnation. You see, it is destiny and a deeply resounding resonance that draws us to be together this hour. You are coded in your DNA to hear my call. In truth, it is your own self who is calling you home, not me, although yourself is also who I am. You thought you would never find me, and I wondered when you would invite me in, but joyfully we are here together. You are sufficiently prepared for our journey. Fear not. You have everything required to move gracefully along the way. As we begin our journey, I will tell you and remind you often to breathe, relax, and open your heart. Within the turning of the pages, you may move more deeply into a greater awareness of yourself. There may be a sense that your experience of present and past time is blending and merging. With this shift in your perception, it is possible that your imagination will use my words to actively evoke emotions of all kinds. I recommend that you breathe, open your mind and heart, and become receptive to your internal experience as my words move upon your soul. If you are resisting your feelings as my words move upon your soul, if you are resisting your feelings that may come with the words, images, and remembrances, there could be some discomfort. My story, in a sense, is the journey perilous taken by the Grail Knights. Remember this, my friend. You determine the timing and the pace of our mutual adventure. One of the requirements I ask of you, as I suggested in my letter, is to be willing to let go of any preconceived notions that you may have of me or of the characters represented in my story. First of all, I suggest that you remove me from any pedestal that you might have placed me on. As Saint Anne, I do not consider myself a saint. That exalted station distances me from you. I am here. I am your friend. Secondly, allow the possibility that I lived far longer than you have ever likely considered possible. To those I knew intimately, I revealed myself as an immortal who maintained a physical body, albeit with some changes, for over 600 years. I tell you this at the outset so that you can relax into my unfolding story as it becomes increasingly complex. The third requirement I ask of you to understand is that I was not above human discord. I felt and came to understand the extreme polarities of the human condition and human emotion because I chose to experience life's full spectrum. I immerse myself into the physical plane, as does any soul who desires to attain self-mastery. There were times of exquisite beauty and ecstasy. There was also severe tribulation and heartbreak. In truth, beloved, my physical life was little different than yours, except that my long years in the same body was something you have not yet experienced. I share this with you so that you may come to know you can also accomplish all that I did and even more. And it continues. For purposes of simplification, the commonly used Gregorian calendar will be used for dates instead of the Hebrew calendar. It was in December of the year 612 BC that a child had been born in the village of Etam, spelled E-T-A-M, just 3 miles south of Bethlehem in Judea, named Hannah, after the mother of Samuel the prophet. Her birth took place about 350 years after the reign of David the king, and some 110 years after the kingdom of Israel had been conquered and carried away into captivity by the Assyrians. Hannah was the physical aspect of my multidimensional soul who prepared the body through which I, Anna, chose to re-enter the drama of earth on the 23rd day of May in the year of 596 BC. And a sore drama it was, for Babylon was now coming forth to rule the hearts of men and women who had forgotten their innocence before the Lord. In 597 BC, while I still abided in the light realm shortly before I requested permission from the councils of light for my return to earth, the Babylonian soldiers of King Nebuchadnezzar swept through Etam. They laid siege to Jerusalem for the second time and carried away thousands of hostages into captivity. It was in May of the following year, during a near-death experience, that Hannah and I voluntarily exchanged places through a process of blending and merging, which I will now briefly explain. You may well ask, why would an adept such as I choose to come into a challenging circumstance like Hannah's? While you may perceive tribulations as unpleasant, even dangerous, the opportunity for expansion and empowerment of consciousness is greatly enhanced. Please allow me to explain this easier said than done answer more fully. Consider the possibility that an oversoul level exists, where many aspects of consciousness focus collectively. Here, a much broader perspective offers the possibility of assessing many different timelines, realities, and dimensions. Within this holographic realm of consciousness, there is an awareness of simultaneous interactive experiences functioning together with every possible cause and effect. From such a plane, it is easy to view the potentials that will facilitate the greatest growth and evolution for the interconnected wholeness of life. Although the painful growth experiences of human life may seem unbearable on a personal level, the end result fulfills a benevolent Creator's desire for ever-expanding personal growth. As you are learning, the ultimate purpose of life is to know itself as love. Rather than feeling hopeless and powerless, you can choose to realign with your soul's original intention and recreate your present challenges into a more harmonious and joyful design. In the more coherent and refined realms of consciousness, the highest possible outcome is always chosen. An impeccable blueprint is securely held in place within the blissful realms of sound and light. In every moment, there is an opportunity to remember your soul's empowered design and to receive guidance from a more inspired choice. So it was with my experience as Hannah. As all factors, including genetic potentials, were considered from the oversoul perspective, a choice was made to project an aspect into the earth plane. You might think of this aspect, the personality called Hannah, as a facet of the Anna oversoul, or group soul collective consciousness, immersed in the illusion of separation. Hannah's limited point of view veiled her awareness of having made a choice to incarnate, as well as her true relationship to her Anna oversoul. Nevertheless, the connection was always there. Also, the potential for consciously co-creating the highest outcome or destiny through her free will choices was available to Hannah. You have heard of stories of individuals who died, went into the light, and upon regaining consciousness, had a greater awareness and faith in their creator source. Such ones often return with many more abilities, even miraculous powers, than they had before they died. So it was with Hannah as I came forth. When she was out of the body, Hannah awakened and remembered her pre-incarnation choices. These choices were: prepare a physical body that could hold specific DNA coding, live in a precise geographical location and time period, have experiences that would provide a strong foundation for self-mastery. All of these choices would fulfill an even greater purpose at the appropriate timing, just as we had agreed at the precise moment of her awakening, even though she seemed to be dying. There was a powerful downloading and merging of Hannah's human consciousness with the Anna Oversoul consciousness. Understanding Hannah's relationship to her Oversoul could assist you to make a deliberate connection with your own Oversoul or higher self through meditation and other methods for enhancing consciousness. With this preliminary explanation about why Hannah and I, her higher self called Anna, exchanged places, let us return to my story. I now found myself in Hannah's body, disoriented and near unto death from the wounds and infections that occurred during childbirth. There happened to be an old seeress named Naomi who heard the mewing cries of my newborn while giving oxen, camels, donkeys, and goats their ration of water and feed. These were corralled in pens and caves behind the wayside inn where her son-in-law presided over guests. She ran for the help of a midwife who lived nearby, and together they quietly and gently washed and restored my infant and me to health. Naomi then took me into her humble abode next to the inn, where I remained until my child could walk. She asked after me, who was I? What had befallen me that I would choose to be alone without adequate shelter for the bringing forth of my labors in childbirth? I was hard-pressed to remember right away. For many days I was delirious, and the suckling of my child the only thing I knew how to do. I was young of body as I looked upon my form, perhaps 16 at the most. With patient understanding, Naomi nursed my mind and body. She knew the human psyche, could read my palms and face, could look into the past and future, and could commune with my soul across time and space. Thus, this dear one read my book of life, and though she did not know, as one who is an adept, her intuition was highly developed. Over the following weeks, she and I began to solve the mystery of why I had chosen to be alone within a stable cave to bring forth my child. Over the next few months, I, Anna of the higher realms of life, and the embodiment of Hannah merged as one. As I grounded into the simple task of caring for my baby daughter and assisting Naomi with the affairs of her hearth, my memory slowly returned. I recovered quickly once I got my bearings, for indeed the energies I brought were of a much higher dimension. Naomi and I gradually pieced together the story of Hannah and how she had come to be with child, and I was then able to heal the wounds that tore at her heart and soul. Briefly now, I will tell you the story, though upon the details I shall not linger. Several weeks before her scheduled wedding, Hannah and her childhood sweetheart, Thomas, came together in the heat of their youthful passion. Hannah conceived in her womb. They held their secret tryst. However, before a marriage ceremony could take place, Thomas was captured and carried away. Soldiers of Babylon poured into the villages, taking women and children hostage. Many of the men lost their lives trying to protect home and family. Those who resisted were brutally killed. The remainder was taken into captivity. The blood and carnage that spilled upon the ground were raw and devastating. Hannah was attending to the care of her two younger brothers while her parents were away gathering food and water. The soldiers found her and her brothers lying huddled beneath their parents' bed. They tore the two boys from her arms and killed them mercilessly, while forcing Hannah to watch. Something in her mind gave way. Hannah would never be the same. Then, after taking their pleasure at the expense of her body and soul, they laid her aside, bruised, unconscious, and wasted. She lay on the muddy street while they set her childhood home on fire. Thinking her dead from a blow to her head, they walked away. At that point, Hannah was lifted up into the celestial realms, where she met her oversoul, who told her that her body could now serve as a vehicle Continuing chapter 2, Anna comes forth near Bethlehem of the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, A Message of Wisdom and Love, read by Penelope. At that point, Hannah was lifted up into the celestial realms, where she met her oversoul, who told her that her body could now serve as a vehicle through which miracles would occur to lift Israel from its dark night. So she and I, who were aspects of the same oversoul, communed, and she agreed to allow that higher dimensional aspect of her soul, which I am, to come into her physical form at a later date. Thus it was, in those days of the second Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, that I inherited the lot of Hannah, who was orphaned, widowed, stripped of all worldly possessions, and left behind by the Babylonians as one who was dead. Returning to consciousness, Hannah suddenly found herself in the position of an outcast, the poorest of the poor, even though she had been born into the royal lineage of the house of David. Her mind was besieged by demons. Most of those who would have sheltered her had been carried away. Most of those who would have sheltered her had been carried away, and those relatives of a higher class who remained in Edom scorned her as one defiled, justifying their indifference by the law of Moses. Thus, wandering in the wilderness of her soul's dark night, Hannah carried Thomas's secret child until the appointed hour, when her purpose for being would be fulfilled. During the remaining months of her pregnancy, we continued to commune and merge in the higher dimensions. As the babe grew within Hannah's womb, the young mother received comfort and increasing self-awareness from her oversoul's deep caring. When her labor began, I, Anna, incarnated fully into Hannah's embodiment through the crown. I entered into the body just as the child came forth. I named my little one Ariana. A golden gift of light from the Great Mother was she. Her little face shone with the brilliance of the sun, and her large brown eyes held the twinkle of starry, reflected seas. Her personality was almost always serene and calming. Ariana's presence was a blessing through all the days she lived near me. During the 13 years after her birth, I walked from place to place within the villages of Etam and Bethlehem, offering myself to households to be hired and taken in. There were many families that required one such as I, who knew something of midwifery, medicinal herbs, and the care of small children, and how to create a peaceful sanctuary within an orderly home. During the 13 years Ariana and I lived within the vicinity of Bethlehem, I met several wise teachers who were able to recognize my unusually high energy. Some knew me better than I knew myself at the beginning of my re-entry into the earth plane. For it requires a period of time to make the necessary attunements, adjustments of mind and body, and transmutations of karmic patterns within cellular memory before the higher consciousness can fully be present in awareness. This is also true for every soul who comes through the birth canal, and for the few who walk in, as I did. It is no different, except that the body is already fully developed and there are fewer veils. I would have you to know that my teachers were among an ancient order that lived in secluded hermitages, secreted away in the hills and among the populace of towns and cities. These obscure mystics recognized one another, even though they usually appeared as quite ordinary to the uninitiated. It took several years of probationary effort on my part, and the patient understanding of my mentors to lift the veils of forgetfulness I had inherited, so that I could remember more fully why I had come again. End of part 2 of chapter 2 of Anna, the grandmother of Jesus. This is Penelope. Peace and love. Peace and blessings. This is Penelope. I'm reading from Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, a message of wisdom and love brought into the present by Claire Hartsong. This is chapter 3, the Essenes of Jerusalem and Mount Carmel. As the years passed and I entered fully into my human journey, I experienced much testing of my soul, during which I occasionally faltered. My steady progress prompted my wise teachers to pass me on to a mystic who resided within the walled city of Jerusalem. My new teacher's name was John. That name will do for now, though in time I knew him by another. He took my now 13-year-old daughter and me under his protective wing. His jovial and devoted wife, Hannah Elizabeth, made space for us in a small storage room located on the roof of their stone dwelling. To be in the clamor of Jerusalem was something of a rude awakening, yet I relished the opportunity to go deeper into the mysteries of my soul, to awaken, remember, and fulfill my part. What had once been a proud city was now a broken city, its former glory but a fading memory. Having ignored the repeated warnings of Jeremiah the prophet, Jerusalem had been devastated by the Babylonian soldiers of Nebuchadnezzar during the course of 3 successive sieges. The suffering that our people had experienced during those 20 years from 605 to 585 BC is beyond description. Many had died. Many more were taken into captivity. Others had fled for their lives. Only the poor remained. Such was the situation in Jerusalem when Jeremiah the prophet wrote his book of Lamentations. And such was still the situation in Jerusalem when I arrived on the scene in 583 BC. Now it was 24 years that I remained in Jerusalem. I thrived within the city, even though there was much unrest and violence from time to time. The temple lay in ruins and the streets strained with the return of those who had fled. Yet I learned how to remain calm and centered within my being, regardless of what my senses perceived was occurring on the outer screen. John was a stone mason by trade and also a scribe reader of the temple library. He was esteemed by most of his peers with whom he worked because he had a way of smoothing the feathers among the many discordant factions of Jews and Gentiles. John was, for the most part, a very gentle and unassuming individual, devoted to God. He could also be unbending about certain principles of the law, as he understood the ancient writings, which he shared with the priests and young men who came for schooling and training to become rabbis. He reminded me in some ways of my father, and thus a need was fulfilled by his attention and care of Ariana and me. John worked upon the restoration of the temple library that had been destroyed by the Babylonian conquerors, whose continuing presence was felt as a bed of thorns. He always seemed to have boundless energy, sleeping little, and rarely was he heavy with fatigue. I desired to know his secret. As if knowing my readiness, John began to appear in my dreams. These dreams felt as real as my waking life. He would take my arm and lead me through doors and passages into great halls of learning, where there were white-robed beings of such light-filled countenances that at first it was difficult to comprehend their human features. How wondrous were these encounters! How thankful I was to be with such a master teacher! How grateful I was for the wise ones who first directed my path to Jerusalem. As the weeks and months went by in this manner, I too began to experience that I required little sleep. I would awaken after just a few hours of sound rest. Sitting upright upon my pallet, I felt fully enlivened, my heart beating strongly, my soul's ancient rhythms As the weeks and months went by in this manner, I too began to experience that I required little sleep. I would awaken just after a few hours of sound rest. Sitting upright upon my pallet, I felt fully enlivened, my heart beating strongly, my soul's ancient rhythms. I would meditate on the light and sound current charging every cell, and soon John would etherically appear and escort me to one of the many halls of records. Sometimes before I met John, I experienced myself floating up and looking down on my body, lying asleep or sitting in meditation. I noticed an elastic like silver cord attaching me to my body. I was free to go anywhere. You would call my out-of-body experiences astral travel. In the Hall of Records, John would open scrolls and begin to teach me how to decipher the symbols and languages. Thus, my etheric training as a scribe had begun in earnest. My daily chores of helping Hannah Elizabeth with her busy household seemed to pass easily. My meditation upon highly refined and subtle light and sound currents sustained my strength of body. I found little time for socializing. That was all right from as far as I was concerned. My desire was for the greater wisdom that was opening up to me. Although there were not many women in my outer life with whom I could share my most intimate thoughts, there were within the inner retreats many females who I came to love. I relished their companionship, even though uninitiated eyes could not see my companions. Some of these I will introduce to you as we continue our walk together, for they are key characters in our unfolding story. Few women I came across in the marketplace or synagogue had access to the learning I was receiving from the great ones. While remaining closely tied to their hearths, most women seemed to be invested in acquiring social graces and status. Frankly, I found their gossip and mundane interests boring and tedious. Even Hannah Elizabeth, though a most caring and gentle soul, could not meet me where I yearned to go. In those first years, I only found 2 women in all of Jerusalem who carried the same vibrational resonance and desire for the hidden wisdom teachings. With these sisters of the immortal soul, a pact was made to support each other in all manners, as our circumstances would allow. These two courageous women, Ruth and Miriam, would grace my life through many years. Fortunately, the number of such women increased as souls beyond the veil came forth in flesh to play their sacred parts with me. At the age of 16, Ariana married a man called James and right away was pregnant with my first grandchild. I, of course, was thrilled by the opportunity to prepare her for giving birth. I had mastered midwifery, having been taught by my mother at a very young age. During the births of my younger brothers. She had taken me with her to attend other women when their hour came. Because of my disposition, which was naturally maternal, I enjoyed the gathering of wisdom that made the passage of the soul into newborn flesh one of love and welcoming. I assisted the labor through certain sounds or combinations of sounds that would flow from my lips while massaging the mother's great belly, heaving with contractions, watching the energies with clairvoyant vision, how the colors and thought forms would shift with her breath. I advised the mother in her breathing and sounding the names of the one God. I also called forth the angels to be present throughout her labor. I had learned the way of herbs for relieving pain, infection, swelling, and the bringing in of the milk. In Jerusalem, my two friends and I kept gardens for such medicinal purposes. We walked out into the fields and pasture lands during the appropriate seasons to gather and replenish our herbal supplies. So it was that I delivered the first of my many grandchildren. To Ariana would be born 8 children altogether. Because of my calming presence, midwifery skills, and herbal knowledge, both the poor and the wealthy sought me out. Welcoming the souls who would take part in Earth's drama warmed my heart. Thus I was engaged in my outer life, and together with the learning in the night from the secret masters of the Brother Sisterhood of Light, my days were full to overflowing. Now that I had a means of livelihood, I took residence in an upper room near the home of Ariana and James in the valley of Kidron, near the old city of David. What a delight to be close to my grandchildren as they grew over the years. For those who showed promise and the desire for esoteric learning, I created a school where they could learn at my knee. Quick they were to learn, and later they followed me to the sands of Egypt. Those whose interests lay in other walks of life came and gathered around me to be entertained and to gain some preparation for life's many lessons. All of my grandchildren enjoyed my stories and our walks within the beauty of nature's halls of wisdom. By this time, John had become fully established within the library of the temple, and his stonemasonry no longer took up as much of his attention. When possible, he would bring me into rooms hidden away where he and a group of master masons who belonged to a secret order had access to subterranean passageways which led to ancient catacombs and archives. Not often in the physical did I go into the vaults, yet enough to establish in my mind and heart a knowing that I would do whatever was necessary to learn how to read the ancient texts and share the hidden knowledge. Strong was my desire to bring the fountain of enlightenment to each one who chose to quench their thirsty soul. Many years before I met him, John had joined a sect of Judaism called the Essenes. Thus, these, the most enlightened and uncorrupted of Judaic Hebrews, trace their origins back to the ancient mystery schools of Moses and Akhenaten and beyond. Derived from the root words esse, being, esse, esse, meaning being, and ene, meaning source. Essene means source of being or holy one. We address one another as sons, son or daughter of the Son, and those who kept the way of healing. We were also known. Every Sabbath and high day, members of the Essene Brotherhood would come to John's household to pray, read, and discuss matters of spirit. Hannah Elizabeth graciously attended to feeding us, and then would retire to the hearth to mend, embroider, or rock a child. She would tune in when there was a topic of interest. Otherwise, she felt her place was to provide a household of order and serenity. Our communions were rich and full, providing me with a family in the outer world who took on the luminescence that I witnessed in the inner planes. Of this community, my two women friends, Miriam and Ruth, were also faithful disciples. So I began my walk with the faithful, the chosen, or the elect, as some called themselves, within the Essene brother sisterhood. I continued in the fellowship of the Essenes throughout the remainder of my long days. James, Ariana's husband, was one of those brothers who hailed from Mount Carmel. The stories he told about Carmel quickened my spirit, and I felt called to go to the mount where Samuel and Elijah had taught, there to establish myself as a full initiate within the ancient Essene mysteries. So it was that, with Ariana, James, and 5 of my 8 grandchildren, I left Jerusalem in 559 BC to begin a new life. Later, Miriam and Ruth also joined the Mount Carmel community. My soul was at peace. I looked to the future with a glad heart. Just as you heard your soul's call, and we have come together to enter upon this journey to know thyself more deeply as a living Christ, so did I respond to my heart's call to enter into the Mount Carmel's mystery school. Carmel, as we called our monastery, is one of the most ancient mystery schools that survived numerous rises of civilization. It has preserved the lineage that holds the Grail codes of ascension and incarnation through which the Divine Mother brings forth Christ consciousness during cosmic, solar, and planetary cycles. Wow. Now I shall share my memories of Mount Carmel by the sea with you, my friend. In joyful gratitude, I walked the beauteous hillsides of Carmel, gathering the sweet lilies of the field and collecting a variety of herbs, with which I prepared medicines for our monastic community, who kept the way of the teacher of righteousness. For we strived with great discipline and dedication to fulfill the power of God within us through the rightful use of energy, by acting upon God's word with forthrightfulness and compassion, thereby bringing an aura of peace to a war-ravaged land. My years at Carmel accumulated to 39 before I went to Egypt to undertake advanced initiations and specialized training. During that time, I took probationary initiations under the tutelage of Solomon and Eloise. These were a couple dedicated completely to the Creator. They entreated me to calmness when my heart raced with fear for my people whenever troops of soldiers came to the mountain. They instilled forgiveness and compassion in my breast when the savage memories of my youth tore through my mind. They opened my book of life and assisted me to remember the law of one, the one God I am. They train my mind, body, and soul to be aligned to the greater good of our community. So it was with great love that I dwelled and learned within my beloved Carmel. There were, at that time, relatively few couples compared to single individuals who chose to be celibate. I was one of the sisters who chose to hold the life force within my bowels and lift it through the fires of my soul into the wholeness of my greater being. Whether married or single, we sanctified our sexual energy and looked upon this great force with reverence and awe. We studied the forces of nature and called them the agents by which we could know God as both Father and Mother, Spirit and Matter. We were attuned to the spirits of plants, minerals, fire and air, water and air. These were called angels, to whom we prayed for grace each night and day. The cyclic seasons were honored, as was Mother Earth and Father Sky, through songs, dances, and feasts. We bowed to the law of life and partook of those laws that replenished and sustained our physical expression of spirit. Through much training in the alchemy of transmutation, we transformed our animal natures. We uplifted our senses to perceive beyond the physical veils of lust, anger, and dualistic needs. We participated in ritual washings and cleansings of our inner and outer minds and bodies. There was much understanding of herbs, simple raw foods, and practices of horticulture that sustained us throughout the seasons. When I was not engaged in transcribing records at the library, assisting with the ill at the infirmary, or practicing midwifery, I would range over the hillsides gathering herbs and seeds. These I planted in our community gardens. Each who lived within our compound labored for the benefit of all, according to each one's disposition and talents. Often to my delight, a flock of youngsters would gather around me to hear stories of the prophets, our people's history, and folklore. Among these children were my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These were precious moments I treasured and stored up in my heart. How I loved Carmel and the life we created there. As I matured in wisdom, rituals and ceremonies were taught to me and to others as we advanced through the degrees of our mystery school initiations. When we were sufficiently prepared, these practices facilitated the activation of psychic abilities and the rejuvenation of our bodies. These rituals, if I were to describe them to you now, would most likely be misunderstood. Therefore, I shall prepare the way so that you may, in due time, receive according to your allowing. The processes of rejuvenation are very ancient processes, and it was in Carmel that I first became aware of these inner secrets for sustaining my body. Truly, I developed the skills and disciplined my mind to recreate my body every month. Although my first 60 years reflected typical aging of my mind and body, once I began to regenerate myself, I looked and felt like a 35-year-old woman. However, there were times over the following centuries when my appearance varied according to the requirements of the situations in which I found myself. Even as Solomon and Eloise taught me the way of the teacher of righteousness, or the rightful use of energy, so shall I share with you, that you may accomplish your purpose for coming to earth. There are a variety of purposes, to be sure, yet it is the great work of the soul that we are desired to finish when all is brought together. Therefore, we shall open the gates that lead to the one who knows the truth beyond the shadows. When you have come to the understanding that all paths converge within the heart of the one, the purpose of this writing shall be fulfilled. So I now leave you to contemplate the feelings in your heart. Is the great work of the soul that for which you have come? If so, then our story shall unfold according to divine decree, that you may receive the energies of transmutation and ascension. You shall be directed from within, for I would have you receive according to your capacity to know Mother, Father, God as your infinite source of supply. Your journey is yours to create. Divine are your choices, every one. I'm here to comfort you during your passage of birth. Even as I hold all life, I represent the mother of mothers. In some ways, you are always my child, yet more so at this time of self-empowerment, I call you my beloved friend. Together we shall merge at the ending of time. Are you ready to remember who you really are and be finished with at last with the drama that held you apart from your true self? If so, read on. Be prepared to exchange your old identity for one far vaster. And those of you who have long trod the way of the one, I welcome your countenance and offer mine as your mirror. Greater affluence is the gift I give to all who persevere through my many words of enigmatic phrases. We have now completed the first circle from where we started, when first we began the story of Anna of Mount Carmel. Yet another circle awaits us. Yet other circles await us as we walk the terrain of my life until all is gathered up and brought into completion. Next to come is the story of my sojourn in Egypt, where I became a high priestess of Isis and Hathor, which prepared me for my work in the Essene and Magdalene orders at Mount Carmel. End of chapter 3 of the book Anna of Jesus, A Message of Love and Wisdom. This is Penelope, Anne Marie, Jordan. Peace and blessings. I'm reading from the book Anna, Grandma. Peace and blessings. This is Penelope. I'm reading from the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, A Message of Wisdom and Love, brought into the present by Claire Hartsong. Chapter 4, Anna's Initiations in Egypt. As we pick up the thread of my life, just before I departed Mount Carmel for Egypt, I hasten to remind you that I had already begun the process of youthening my body by disengaging from the collective consciousness that believed in aging and dying. I had participated in most of the initiations into self-mastery that the Mount Carmel Mystery School could offer me. My incessant desire was to expand my awareness and innate capacities as well as to know union in God, while still retaining my physical body. There had been ones who had gone to Egypt and upon their return to Carmel shared their increased wisdom, motivating me to leave and trust my destiny to the gods and goddesses who had prepared Moses. So it was that I arranged to travel by foot, cart, and camel with several of my Essene brothers, my daughter Ariana, and some of my descendants. We joined a caravan of traders and together with other immigrants made our way by land to the Nile's Delta. Our destination was On, a temple complex mostly in ruin, around which many Hebrews still remained since the Exodus. They lived in clustered village homes made of sandstone and mud bricks. You know this area by its Greek name, Heliopolis. Very little of ancient On remains in your day because it lies buried below the Cairo airport and is engulfed by Cairo's sprawling metropolis. During the next 303 years of my long life, I lived and worked in the ancient underground city of Tot, whose subterranean passages stretch all the way from the Great Pyramid to the seaside port you now call Alexandria. I also had access to a portion of the greater labyrinthine passages that are part of the Inner Earth network. Some have called Argatha. To be sure, my friend, this is a truth that soon may be uncovered in your day. And even as I can see your generation, so shall you see the hidden events of my experience long ago as we continue our walk together. I invite you to join me now as one who is prepared to labor within the vaults of time. I gladly do this because, as I have said before, I would have you succeed in your journey through this world of illusion and know the blessings of true vision as you behold your eternal self. My words in this chapter will refer to terms perhaps unfamiliar and esoteric. Many of these you'll find briefly defined in the glossary, and most will be expanded upon as we continue my story. More than anything else, it was the remnant people remaining close to the earth plane through millennia of time who drew me forth to ancient Egypt. Known as the Brother Sisterhood of White Light, they have carried Shekinah / Sophia's Divine Mother Light, Divine Mother, the intelligence behind all things, torch of wisdom that reveals the Logos, Gnosis, or the word of creation, hidden face. These are the ones that remember from life to life through the veils of flesh. Their origins in that life, eternal, far beyond life's. I'm sorry. These are ones that remember from life to life through the veils of flesh, their origins in that life eternal, far beyond life's gravitational pull. These were my teachers who cultivated my soul and awakened my mind to remember the law of one. The ascended masters, mighty Thoth and his consort, Shisat, embodied in form, were my most revered teachers. Serapis Bey, resplendent of countenance, was like a diamond of purity and power. There were also others, male and female, who towered before me in their bodies of radiant light and had mastered the physical plane. Ancient ones whose names do not matter, some recorded in history and many others who choose anonymity. With these I mingled both night and day. Then there were my spiritually impoverished brothers and sisters who walked as if asleep on the surface sands. The humble of the land were also my teachers, as I occasionally walked among them, my mantle of compassion touching those who would be free. Having come to Egypt, pulled here by the request of my soul and the brother sisterhood of light, I was one, ancient in the ways of wisdom, yet inexperienced in the flesh of my current incarnation. Focusing my energies, I pressed through the rigors of much training and discipline, which prepared me to move freely through the labyrinthine passages of our underground city. I was able to pass as a thief in the night through the outer temples of the city of On and the surrounding plateau, unseen by those who would take me hostage. So it was that I learned to live and work in a secret world, hidden from the eyes of those who would deride and cast me into darkness, the sacred truths, and cast into darkness the sacred truths of the one God. Knowledge of passwords, frequency signatures, secret handshakes, Symbols, emblems were required to move freely within this cloistered world. These occult signs had come from a time so ancient that most have forgotten their actual origins. I became privy to such knowledge because of my lineage, because of my intense desire to know, understand, and practice esoteric wisdom. And most of all, I came because of the undeniable commitment within my heart to accomplish a great work that was hidden from my mind but felt as a fountain of living water sustaining my soul. Once I had adjusted to this new way of life, I labored both day and night as one who required little sleep or the light of the solar sun. Within the hidden vaults where I labored were treasured scrolls of papyrus and parchment, and tablets of metal and stone. Some of the tablets were of gold, copper, bronze, and electrum. Some were of unknown elements said to have been brought by peoples who carried them to earth from the stars. It was those treasures of wisdoms whose mystery I desired to unravel that most intrigued and stirred my soul. I pursued the wisdom teachings as if they were fleeting birds, butterflies, and rainbows. These most ancient works held a magnetic attraction, etched by hands unknown, yet known, which drew me irresistibly to Egypt and her libraries hidden beneath veils of stone. The focus of my attention was upon the translation of records of the stars of Earth's most ancient peoples into the Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic languages. Other scribes had the task of bringing other languages such as Sanskrit and Sumerian to papyri, parchment, stones of clay, and thin metal tablets and scrolls. Our records were preserved in archival vaults. Most of my work was carefully etched with a stylus into sheets of damp clay before being brought to the attention of a council of scholars, who would then come to a consensus regarding the accuracy of my translation. When all was in agreement, I then transferred the letters and hieroglyphic patterns to documents of more fragile yet more transportable paper. Many laborers were employed in the making of papyri from the lotus plants that grew along the Nile. After weaving the dried pressed fibers into lengthy sheets, one who was a member of our brother sisterhood carefully stacked the papyrus in a corner of my cell within the dormitory of the scribes. Here, below the sands of the desert, I took of the records hidden from the profane and made copies that could be taken back to Mount Carmel, the mystery school of the Essenes. There was light sufficient for my seeing, supplied by oil lamps and shining stones, which were anointed by those empowered Atlantean priests and priestesses who knew how to bring down the light of the sun god Ra. These were my teachers, who still retained the secrets of light, sound, and color. Through the use of concentrated thought and frequencies of sound, they directed the inner eye to its focused purpose. With charged hands, they held amplifying rods and staffs as extensions of their minds and bodies to carve and lift mighty stones into their perfect places. It was in this way that ancient monuments such as the Sphinx and Great Pyramid were created, which our archaeologists attribute to slave labor. However, after many of the telekinetic powers had been lost, indeed, many slaves were used to build pharaohs' palaces, tombs, and temples. There was adequate air in my underground chamber, which was supplied and circulated through ducts, tunneled ingeniously in stone, from portals above to vast caverns below. In our initiations, we remembered how to breathe in such a way as to access the God force permeating all creation, thus not depending only on oxygen to maintain our being. Underground, streams and aqueducts filled cisterns and quenched our thirst. Food was simple, supplied by those who tilled the diluvial soil of the fertile Nile. There were those of the brother sisterhood who husbanded gardens and flocks. They took delight in serving those of us who sequestered ourselves away from the burning sun and the Nile's fresh breezes, which scattered rays of light into shimmering diamonds upon the flowing blue waters above. Thus our basic requirements were met. Every other night I arose and went forth to the outer temples through doorways that were opened by the power of my voice. This I did to meet with companions and perform rituals known as the high alchemy of Horus and the magic of Isis, until the sun returned at dawn. The purpose of our coming together was to keep our bodies strong and to celebrate the cyclic seasons of earth, moon, stars, and sun. Through meditations upon the sun and moon, we balanced our internal polarities and illuminated our minds and bodies. We performed mystical practices that took us into the archetypal Garden of Paradise, in which the tree of life was revealed. Here, we learned how to erect and climb the ladder of light in order to harvest eternal golden fruit. In this way, and because of our internal illumination, we were able to live below the earth's surface in relative comfort and security. Our physical lives, if we chose, could extend into many centuries so that we could render great service during one lifetime. Eventually, I joined the very ancient Brotherhood of Tot, which gathered its members on the nights of every full and new moon. Also during the solar cycles and galactic portal days, we came together from many lands throughout the world. Some of us were immortal, having lived upon the earth for thousands of years. Some were, as I, freshly returned, growing in the remembrance of our way, which illustrates Osiris's resurrection, Isis' immaculate conception, and Horus's archetypal journey into full enlightenment. We shared our wisdom with those of earthly flesh who desired to awaken and prove by their progress that they could withstand the rigors of sustained discipline. We brought ourselves into circles, mingling with upright stones that carried the inscriptions and frequencies of those worlds and stars beyond Earth's present season. We brought our records, data we had gathered as we traversed the earth, and shared in our meetings the nature of humanity's evolution, conditions, concerns, and resolutions. In some of our mystical literature, you have heard of the dweller, who resides deep within the halls of Amenti. This one was our primary spokesperson. Being neither male nor female, it was indeed an androgynous energy field that facilitated interdimensional communication. There were chambers of initiation where we would go from time to time to meet with the dweller and remember who we were through space and time. Then we would go forth to fulfill our various assignments and duties. Some arose and returned to light craft to observe and influence the affairs of earth as decreed by universal law. Some walked among the populace of the lands of earth as seemingly ordinary men and women. Others stayed obscure, hidden below. Such the one was I, until I had completed certain initiations, which would make me capable of playing my part by moving freely among the surface tribes of earth to fulfill my destined part. There was much to learn and much to remember. Fortunately, there were the records others and myself had kept during earlier eras, and there was always the true self, who holds the mysteries whole and pure within the inner temple. I learned how to access this self through stilling my mind and opening the 7 seals or rings of power. These are known as the subtle energy centers yogis call chakras. There were methods for erecting the internal etheric rod of light, raising life force through the spine's 3 channels, and circulating cosmic energy through the physical body's staff of life, or endocrine glands. I remembered who I was before the rising of Lemuria and Atlantis when I served the cup, the Holy Grail, and I remembered my promise to remain on earth until all are lifted up. Once I had gained a greater mastery of the physical laws, I began taking my advanced initiations within the many temples that had been created by the ancient ones along the lower and upper Nile, some gracing oases and mountains on either side. I traveled deep into Nubia and beheld the spectacle of Ramses. Tomb and the monument to my lineage you call Hathor. As I enacted the lion-headed Sekhmet's and Hathor's ancient creation rituals, I sang the Great Mother's praise, chanted mantras, and danced with timbrel, frame drum, and sistrum. The Divine Mother's rights had become corrupted and her voice suppressed by the politics of priests and pharaohs who held to untransmuted lust, greed, and blind patriarchal dogma. Nevertheless, there were those of us who kept the way pure and untainted. Though to be sure, even we were pressed to remember and pass on the energies in complete fidelity. Having access to reality that is beyond the human senses, we could see those who were invisible to untrained eyes. Yet, it must be acknowledged that in our fervor to preserve the power of internal high alchemy through darkened ages, we inadvertently created initiatory processes that hardened into secret rituals, cryptic codes, and elitist hierarchies, which made direct experience a most circuitous route. Many lost their way and confused the outer practices with that for which they sought. Few fully quenched their thirst by drinking the living waters poured directly from the goddess's internal revelatory cup. 40 years after my arrival in Egypt, I completed my advanced initiations and began serving the Great Mother as a priestess of Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, in addition to continuing my work as a scribe. I developed the capacity to be Divine Mother's rights had become corrupted and her voice suppressed by the politics of priests and pharaohs who held to untransmuted lust, greed, and blind patriarchal dogma. Nevertheless, there were those of us who kept the way pure and untainted. Though to be sure, even we were pressed to remember and pass on the energies in complete fidelity. Having access to reality that is beyond the human senses, we could see those who were invisible to untrained eyes. Yet, it must be acknowledged that in our fervor to preserve the power of internal high alchemy through darkened ages, we inadvertently created initiatory processes that hardened into secret rituals, cryptic codes, and elitist hierarchies, which made direct experience a most circuitous route. Many lost their way and confused the outer practices with that for which they sought. Few fully quenched their thirst by drinking the living waters poured directly from the goddess's internal revelatory cup. 40 years after my arrival in Egypt, I completed my advanced initiations and began serving the Great Mother as a priestess of Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, in addition to continuing my work as a scribe. I developed the capacity to be conscious of many different dimensions and realities through astral travel, or conscious out-of-body travel, by location, that is, splitting and projecting one's conscious awareness to another location, time, or dimension, and teleportation, that is, deconstructorizing one's body into a more subtle form and projecting it to another location where it is physically reassembled. Through Isis mysteries of resurrection, known as the rite of the sepulchre, I continued to regenerate the cells of my body as one of immortal youth. As the years went by, I became known as one who excelled in the mysterious arts and sciences of high alchemy. Although I demonstrated wondrous spiritual powers, psychic gifts were not my primary focus. They were the means to an end and natural byproducts of my devoted discipline and love, by which I sought to serve the Creator and uplift the whole of life. Throughout my journey, I became intimate with the full spectrum of the Great Mother's many faces and her creative powers. The attributes of the goddess were expressed through me in all my days, until my sojourn as the one called Anna was finished. My soul has served her grace through all my incarnations. I became known as a high priestess of the Great Mother, and received many initiations, whom I taught how to cultivate the energies for which they were prepared to incarnate. I assessed their learning and capacity to hold high frequency light patterns coherent within their bodies, minds, and lives. I was, as it were, a psycho-spiritual counselor. Eventually, my work took the form of assisting initiates to prepare themselves for the resurrection sepulchre, in which they overcame the illusion of death. Thus, I labored within the temple mystery schools, assisting everyone, whether male or female, who chose to transmute his or her mortal soul's base dross into the gold of immortal enlightenment. I share my Egyptian experiences with you as a way to assist your own evolution and empowerment. Your life on planet Earth is your initiatory temple. Christ consciousness is expanding exponentially every day. My dear friend, have you noticed that time is accelerating, or that extreme polarities are becoming more obvious? Perhaps you are experiencing or know people who are having extraordinary metaphysical, that is, beyond physical experiences. Have you seen in the media how science is validating realms of unconsciousness that just a few years ago were not considered possible or even relevant? Once one begins to have the experiences of extrasensory phenomena, as I did, the mystery dissolves and the realization comes that superconsciousness is the birthright of humanity. You do not need me in order to accomplish your heart's deepest desire to attain the enlightenment of a Christ. However, as a catalyst, through reflection and compassion, I am here to assist you into a greater awareness of ultimate freedom and union. Because of the lofty nature of what I have been and will be sharing with you about my initiatory accomplishments, you might think of me as much more advanced than you, and that the great work is beyond your capabilities. But I am here to reassure you that you would not be taking this journey with me and others if you were not already well prepared. The essence of what we will accomplish together is more a remembrance than a learning of something new. What I ask of you is to allow your awareness of the planetary awakening that is presently underway to increase day by day. With every step you take, the seen and unseen realms will support the comforting and encouraging realization that you are not alone. To help you with this, I encourage you to think of me as being very much like yourself. Indeed, if you were to see me in real life, I would seem so ordinary that you might miss the chance of walking with me if you were looking for someone you thought to be spiritual. My job is to take you to the mountaintop where I will show you expanded vistas of your potential. Then your real journey begins when we come down from the spiritual mountain and enter the valley of ordinariness and personal application. My beloved friend, please understand that those of us who demonstrate Christ consciousness support your choices to increase in wisdom. Personal application. My beloved friend, please understand that those of us who demonstrate Christ consciousness support your choices to increase in wisdom so that you may also be of service to others as a model through your presence and actions. That's the end of chapter 4. Anna, grandmother of Jesus, a message of wisdom and love. I am Penelope Anne Marie Jordan. Thank you for listening. Peace and love. All right. Well, we have been listening to Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, brought into the present time by one Claire Hartsong. Now, you've been listening for about an hour, so we're going to hit pause. There is one more chapter that I have recorded, chapter 5. So if you have been enjoying the book so far, we can take a break and then we can hit go again when you guys come back. So that's up to you. I'm going to go ahead on and record the rest, and we'll see you when you get back. Peace and love. This is Penelope. I will be reading from the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, a message of wisdom and love brought into the present by one Claire Hartsong. This is chapter 5, Alexandria. After completing my Egyptian initiations, a number of my fellow Essenes and I came together to counsel with one another in Heliopolis. We knew we would be soon returning to Palestine, and we agreed that it would be advantageous for us to move to Alexander's great seaport city, which had taken his name. So it was that I concluded my 30 or so years in Egypt within this cosmopolitan Greek city, situated at the mouth of the Nile Delta. Some of us entered into the rather extensive subterranean caverns under Alexandria because we were more comfortable in our familiar habitat below the earth's surface. It was here that I again went underground. I spent my first 9 years at Alexandria within a complex of hidden chambers, where I and my Essene brothers and sisters worked diligently to copy ancient and more current texts. We had brought many records from On, or Heliopolis, as it was now called, of which we had made copies to give to Alexander's library in exchange for our sanctuary status. And more importantly, our willingness to barter our expertise as scribes gave us access to the ever-expanding treasure of sacred, philosophical, and historical works that were pouring into the massive library Alexander had built to impressively reflect his empire and his Hellenistic ideals. There were those of us who worked above ground as liaisons to secure our operations below and within the external library. Some of our community departed Egypt to return to Palestine early on. There were those of us who worked above ground as liaisons to secure our operations below and within the external library. Some of our community departed Egypt to return to Palestine early on, and others lingered. I chose to continue my studies and the work of copying text for the next 20 years. Needless to say, I had become very accustomed to my incognito identity and cloistered lifestyle. Yet, I knew it was time to begin preparing to rejoin my Essene community at Mount Carmel. This choice required me to gradually reacclimatize to the life of surface dwellers. In order to deal with the harshness of the outer world, I began making expeditions into the great library and openly visited the nearby temple that was dedicated to Isis. I braved going into the marketplace. I had already made many secret visits to the temple and had become quite well known over the years to a number of high priestesses who served Our Lady, as we called Isis. At last, when I felt at ease with the external chaos all around me, I agreed to take up my high priestess friend's invitation to live permanently in the priestess's quarters within the temple complex. Although I was still cloistered, I had successfully made the transition to being a surface dweller again. I will also share with you that during my last 100 years spent primarily in Egypt, I also began to make voyages with others of my fellows to Britain, Greece, southern Gaul, and various Mediterranean islands. Most of these journeys occurred during my last years in Alexandria. I found my foreign adventures grandly uplifting and expanding for my soul. I especially enjoyed my sojourn in Britain, which I felt was like an extraordinary homecoming. While I was there, I was adopted by a Celtic chieftain and became one of his daughters, although I was many years his senior. As I gazed into the probable future, I knew I would someday return to Britain's verdant hills and plains. Many years hence, I could see myself making preparations for my physical body to take its eventual rest on Avalon's fair isle. That, however, is for another telling. Let us return to Alexandria and a brief biography of her namesake, Alexander the Great. Alexander of Macedonia was a student of Aristotle who took his initiations in Egypt within the most sacred chambers hidden away from those blind to inner seeing. He was indeed a wise serpent, as initiates of the mysteries were often called, who knew how to lift the fiery serpentine energy up his spine and how to decipher the cryptic codes of the occult or hidden world. Alexander supported and gathered to himself the elect, the magi, the soothsayers, the magicians, and the doctors of body, mind, and soul. Long before leaving Egypt for my return to Mount Carmel, I chanced to meet Alexander in a secret council meeting when he was but a youth. Therefore, I looked upon him as my brother, though he was eccentric and was eventually seduced by the glamours of power in later years. When corruption entered his mind through a sickness that is common to those who compromise their souls. Though his years were short, his influence left a mighty legacy. One day, as I was making an excursion into the inner city, I looked up and saw Alexander's conquering banner waving above the monumental tomb that had recently been erected in his memory after he had died at the age of 33. All the peoples of Alexandria and the Nile's temple cities had felt heavily oppressed by the inept governance of the Ptolemaic Macedonian dynastic families. Ptolemaic Macedonian dynastic families. A teeming throng of humanity, to be sure, called Alexandria their home. Hence, here was a large cosmopolitan city of such grandeur that I could not compare it to Jerusalem, except to say that Alexandria held far more wonder for my inquisitive soul. Long had it been since I left Jerusalem and her defilement. From messengers who traversed the lands, I received word that Jerusalem had now become so corrupt and the ways of the Lord so distorted by politics and dissension that I found it a grievous sore upon my heart to think of returning to be within her towering walls. But to be in Alexandria, even with her intrigue, violence, and suffering, was a relief and a solace. In her port were harbored the boats of many distant lands, and among her narrow streets and wide boulevards were peoples of all colors, beliefs, and customs. There was a facet of myself that took delight in the clamor, excitement, and adventure of so much stimulation to my mind and senses. Yet, there was also another side of me that preferred the silence, the inner contemplative life, and the rejuvenating balm of nature. Thank God I can enjoy both aspects here in newly born Alexandria. Built over a remnant outpost of the brother-sisterhood of light that came from Atlantis. Here, in the form of marbled halls and temples and great fortresses of granite and sandstone, were the monuments to humankind's evolution through time. Sequestered deep beneath the outer vaults was also a hidden city, as I have already revealed, not known by those who rioted, caroused, and numbed their souls. It was to this boon of ancient wisdom that I was drawn like a moth to an eternal flame, to be lifted up into the light of direct revelation. From its very inception, Alexandria was destined to become an international melting pot, and it did, indeed, facilitate the merging of many different cultures: Atlantean, Egyptian, Cretan, Phoenician, Hebrew, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Macedonian, and Roman. Yet the predominant culture was Greek rather than Egyptian, so that for all intents and purposes, it became a Greek outpost in Egypt. That was essentially devoted to the cultivation of Hellenistic culture. Those of Egyptian descent who were of the priestly line or the pharaonic lineage had temporary residences in Alexandria, where they were entertained. However, their primary residences were at Heliopolis, Thebes, and other cities along the Nile. Thus, their presence was honored, but they had little influence upon the political and social environment of Alexandria until the incursion of Rome brought an end to the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra, who was of Macedonian descent, was allowed to reign as Queen of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC. On the other hand, those Egyptians of the working classes within Alexandria were held in subservience and had little opportunity to raise their social status through intermarriage. The Hebrew population was especially welcome for a number of years, during which they were accorded privileges comparable to those enjoyed by Greek subjects. However, this policy resulted in such a rapid increase of the Jewish population that they had aroused considerable resentment by the time I made my departure in 207 BC. So it was that during the months before my departure, I began in earnest to finish my library assignments and temple service and make my farewells. Through the remainder of my days, I would continue to feel Egypt's influence, and in a future time, my story will return to her ancient monuments. When we meet again, my dear friend, we will take up the accumulated treasure of wisdom gathered in Egypt and make our way to my beloved Mount Carmel by the sea. End of chapter 5 of Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, a message of wisdom and love brought into this current time by Claire Hartsong. Read by Penelope Anne Marie Jordan.